Going to begin. First of all, I have a special guest here who's joining us. I have Josh Nichols, who is a member of the Cub Scouts Pack 107. And real quick, before I turn the meeting over to Josh for just a few minutes while he does our intro for us this evening, I attended their meeting on Friday with his pack as part of a merit badge that they earn for participating and talking to community leaders. I just wanted to thank the members of PAC 107, the Den leaders. We did this via Zoom meeting. So I figure why not change this up a little bit and have a brave volunteer. Josh raised his hand. And what he's going to do for us tonight is he's going to read the beginning of our intro and introduce all the select board members and turn the meeting back over to me. But before we begin, Josh, can you unmute yourself?
There you go.
Welcome, Josh.
Welcome.
Hi, you want to give us a little bit about yourself? Tell us who you are and what's it like to be a scout before you go ahead and read, or you just want to jump right in and read the opening statement?
I think I'll just do the paper.
Okay, great. I'm going to turn this over to you, Josh. The floor is yours.
Welcome to the Select Board meeting, February 9th, 2021. Confirming member access. As a preliminary matter, my name is Josh Nichols, and I am a member of Grafton Scout Pack 107, and I will be reading the Select Board meeting introduction for today. Peter Carlson will be the chair of the town of Grafton Select Board meeting, and if you would permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda and present and can hear me. Select Board members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Peter Carlson.
Peter Carlson present.
Doreen DeFazio.
Doreen DeFazio here.
Matt Often.
Matt Often is here.
Ed Prisby.
Ed Prisby here.
Colleen Roy.
Colleen Roy here.
With the member responses recorded, please allow me to yield to the chair, Peter Carlson.
Thank you, Josh, very much for that intro. You did a great job. Thank you very much. A big round of applause to you and your pack. Very good job for participating in tonight's meeting. Thank you very much. You're more than welcome to stick around, but we're going to get going with the rest of this, okay? Thank you very much, everybody. And if applicable for staff members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Temporary Town Administrator Carter Terenzini is not here yet. Fire Chief Mickey Goth here. Not here. And Bob Berger.
Bob Berger's present.
Thank you. Town Planner Chris McGoldrick.
Chris McGoldrick present.
Great. And William Blake.
William Blake is present.
Thank you. For those members, guests who will be on the agenda, when I please call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mr. Barry Smith.
Barry Smith here.
Mr. Mark Haddad.
Haddad here.
Ms. Angelina Correa. Oh, I think I got you on mute.
Andy.
Okay.
Here.
Thank you. Good evening. This open meeting of the Town Grafton Select Board is being conducted remotely consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the Governor order suspends the requirement of open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of the public body are allowed to encourage to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted on the town's website at www.grafton-ma.gov, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will not feature any public comment for any public hearing this evening. For this meeting, the select board is convened via Zoom and is posted on the town's website identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that others may be able to see you and that take care to not screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording and viewed by others later. All supporting materials have been provided to these members shall be made available to the town's website when final minutes are posted unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless either chair will note otherwise. Before we turn to our first item on the agenda, before we do so, I would just like to cover some ground rules tonight. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, I will open a discussion with the select board members and will invite each by name to provide any comment. Please raise your hand. Please hold your name until it is called. Please remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. After all members have had the opportunity to speak, the chair will then close deliberations, and if necessary, any vote that will be taken tonight will be conducted by roll call. All right, thank you very much. Josh, thank you very much for coming in. You're more than welcome to hang out and watch, but we want to thank you for doing that intro for us. You did a great job. All right, so first up on our agenda this evening, let me just pull that up.
Mr. Chair, it looks like Amy Marr is an attendee. She might be a panelist for the first agenda item.
I will put her in. Thank you. Thank you, Colleen. All right, so good evening here. So first up tonight, we have the Grafton Sustainability Commission to come in tonight and do a presentation. I would like to hand this over to Mr. Prisby, who is the select board rep for that committee. Mr. Prisby, do you want to give an intro?
I'll give an intro, and Peter, could you allow me to share my screen as well? I think that might mean making me or authorize me in through Zoom.
To go, sir.
Okay, thank you. All right, so at long last, part one of the GSC's report is benchmarking. So for those of you who either weren't here 18 months ago or have forgotten because it's getting to be kind of a while, Grafton established what's called the Grafton Sustainability Commission to begin to examine some of the critical questions that are going to face the community moving forward in terms of the service levels that we provide to the community. It doesn't come as news to anybody, certainly in this meeting, but in the community broadly, that we had an override in 2014. We just passed another one in 2020. And when we passed our override in 2020, we did so with the full knowledge that we may well need another one either by FY24 or FY25. This means that there is an issue with the sustainability of the service levels that we provide and our current spending levels, given what our income is. Another way of putting that is we're running a structural deficit. And the purpose of the committee was to determine whether or not we're doing everything we can to avoid running that deficit every year while providing a consistent level of services. The first step in figuring out whether or not we should be doing something differently than what we're already doing, we felt, was to determine whether or not we are outliers in any way, shape, or form, in any meaningful way, with what our comparable peer communities are around the state. What we did was we first endeavored to determine who our peer communities were, both on the municipal side and on the school side, and then compared key demographic, income, service level, and spending habits to those other communities. So for instance, we determined whether or not we were outliers in demographics, number of people who were living here, age of people who were living here, economic background, educational background of the people who are living here versus our peer communities. Then we determined on a very 60,000 foot level, on a very broad level, whether or not we were outliers on tax rate or annual tax bill. And then we moved down the list to try and figure out where we were in terms of service levels to all these communities. And before I begin the slideshow that we put together, I just want to make a couple of notes. First of all, nobody should walk away from the presentation that we're about to give drawing any broad conclusions or thinking that we drew any broad conclusions about the service levels that Grafton provides. The only thing that this data does really is to lead us to additional questions. Secondly, and I think this is important too, we are somewhat hamstrung or at least captivated by the data that is available to us. So in order to compare us with other communities, we had to collect data about what other communities were doing. A lot of that came from the Department of Revenue, and the Department of Revenue runs about a fiscal year behind in terms of what the data is that they'll have and put up on their website. The only other data they were able to get was things that we were reaching out to other communities to obtain. That was a little bit dicey. We were in the process of doing that right when COVID hit. So really we're relying on DOR stuff. So as we go through this, you'll see a lot of the data comes from FY 2018, which now seems like forever ago. But really it's the data that was available to us as we were going through this in the middle of FY 19. So a lot of the data that we're using, to the extent that it comes from other communities and we're comparing ourselves to other communities, comes from FY 2018. There is some data that we are using from FY 2020, which is the most recent budget data. So with that caveat, I will begin my slideshow presentation. Bear with me. All right. Hold on one second, everybody. What I want to do is play this thing.
There you go.
Chair, if I may. Top right, present. There you go.
Here we go. All right. So we begin with the first slide. Again, this is basic background demographic information. A little bit about how we came to our peer communities or our sister communities on the municipal side. For those of you who are in the know, you'll probably immediately recognize that Shrewsbury and Westboro really aren't peer communities as defined by the DOR, but the community felt that given 80% of our expenditures for personnel, the fact of the matter is whether or not you consider them sister communities for the purposes of the Department of Revenue, communities like Shrewsbury and Westboro are competing with us for the same pool of municipal employee talent. So when you want to go hire a teacher, or when you want to go hire a town administrator, or anybody really who's going to come work here, we're competing for the services of those employees with people who are geographically contiguous with us. And as a result, our budget to a certain extent, and part of our expenditures, is going to chase theirs. So what a community like Shrewsbury is doing is relevant to the discussion because they're a driving force in outlay for employees that we might want to hire. We saw this, I think, most acutely recently, where we were looking to hire a fire inspector, and we couldn't get it done at the salary rate that we wanted to hire that person at. And we saw it also with the town accountant position that was vacant for a lot longer than we wanted to be vacant, because again, we found ourselves on the low end of the salary scale. That news might be frustrating to community residents who are frequently remind me that their tax bill hasn't gone down anytime recently. But that is largely because, again, 80% of what we lay out for is for compensation, and compensation simply is not going down. Particularly for positions like a town accountant that are scarce. People simply aren't, they don't want to go into those fields as much as they used to. At any rate, you can see we're not outliers here with anybody except for Shrewsbury as to population. And these are the communities that we are comparing ourselves against. Next slide. Per capita income. One of the things that you're going to find, or one of the themes that we came across when we were developing this data, is that Grafton is firmly in the middle. We're in the middle in terms of income. We're in the middle in terms of expenditure. We're in the middle in terms of annual tax bills. And here you see Grafton's annual per capita income, much higher than Oxford, thankfully, but not quite as high as Westboro. We're at 47,178. They're at 58,811. Again, median earnings per worker as of 2019, firmly in the middle. Median household income in 2019, 102,737, again, firmly in the middle. Grafton property values. Grafton, I think the most important part of this slide is Grafton is what we call a 90-10 community. Meaning if you look at a community like Westboro, Auburn, Bellingham up on the top, there is a percentage of their income that is derived from residential taxes and a percentage of their income that is derived from industry. We are down at the bottom there, obviously. We rely 91% on our residential tax and only 9% on our commercial. That is not news to anybody here. We didn't need to get together a commission to put that out there, but this is an important slide. And it demonstrates just how much Grafton does rely on its commercial tax base. And this raises a question that's been raised time and time again. How do we go about increasing our commercial revenue? Do we want to go about increasing our commercial revenue? How do we do it? Those are all questions that are going to be or attempted to be tackled and answered by the municipal cost structure portion of the report that is hopefully forthcoming, as well as the income portion of our report. Now, this slide is probably the one, and I argued to put this closer to the top. This is the bread and butter, right? So every single time we have a discussion about contracts in the community, every single time we have a discussion about our budget in the community, we all hear it as select board members. I'm being taxed out of town, say community members. I'm going to go live someplace where the taxes aren't so crazy. Now, this again is FY20 data. So we're working off of data that is about a year old. According to this data, your single family tax bill in 2020 was $65.30. That puts you firmly in the middle with comparable communities that we're surrounded by. This slide obviously is due for an update after the override passed. Now, this report was ready as of September, and most of the data was collected around about the time that we were going to vote for the override. I can tell you that at that time, single family tax bill data from these other communities was not going to be available to us. If we were to redo this slide, and we probably will by the time the final report is done, you would see that according to DOR, our annual single family tax bill is actually $7,295. So it's gone up about $700-800 annually on average. That still puts us in the middle compared to all these other communities. And I guarantee you their single family average tax bill has also gone up over the course of the past year. So despite the override, we're still in the middle. And that, again, only serves to raise other questions about whether or not we are funding services adequately, whether or not Grafton residents are happy with the service levels where we are. And as these slides continue, you'll see that these questions sort of have a way of mounting on top of each other. We analyze then what we actually were spending our money on compared to other communities. Now, a note about this slide, our total budget in this slide, you can see, is $55,457. And I believe, and my fellow committee members can correct me if I'm wrong, that is because, again, this particular slide we're operating off of FY 2018 numbers. So you can see that percentage of the school budget, I think back then, was 62%. It's a different figure every single year, but it seems to hover somewhere between 55% and 60% every single year. Again, you can see that we're not outliers in that particular on that particular line. The percentage of the budget that goes to DPW, we're a little bit higher than the others, up at 5.2%, as opposed to a community like Ashland that's closer to 3.2%. Culture and recreation was another interesting one. We do tend to spend slightly higher as a percentage of our budget on culture and recreation. And those three areas combined for 69% of our total overall spend in that particular year. Now, there are caveats to that. Nobody should make the conclusion that we're either spending too much or too little on schools, too much or too little on DPW, too much or too little on recreation. Recreation, for instance, some of that spend is offset by income that these recreational programs bring in. Some of that DPW spend is attributable to certain projects that we were working on at the time. Some of that school spend is attributable to where we were at the budget that particular year. So again, this sort of conversation or this analysis only leads you to ask, okay, well, if we are a little bit higher than our peer communities in these particular areas, why is that? Are Grafton residents happy with these service levels, or are these service levels outliers that we need to explore further? Then we go on to spending on Grafton general government services, which is the services that are provided out of the municipal center, and then in police and fire. So the fire is the most interesting line in all of this. We're pretty much in the middle on our general government spending. We're pretty much in the middle on our police, the percentage of our budget that goes towards the police department, actually a little bit lower than other communities. And when we get to the slide about crime, you know, one could make the conclusion, if one wanted to, that we're actually getting tremendous value out of our police spend. Fire, though, if you go over the percentage of our budget allocated to fire is really on the bottom third of our peer communities, which begs the question, you know, are we sort of subsidizing other areas of spending on what has been an artificially low spend on our fire safety due to the voluntary nature of the department? That obviously all is going to change in the very near future as we start to bring on more full-time fire personnel and fire administration. You're going to see that percentage of the budget either increase or the total budget increase to accommodate that lower percentage. So either way, you know, the days of our being able to, I think, subsidize other parts of the budget based on a low fire spend, those days are over. Debt service. Grafton is in the middle in terms of the percentage of the budget that it spends on debt. You know, this sort of begs the question about the construction projects. Again, I think over the years, the public perception has been Grafton has gone crazy on spending on capital projects in debt service. That doesn't appear to be the case given the percentage of our budget that we're allocating toward debt service as compared to other communities. I got to move my little Zoom window here, but you can see Auburn is 11.7%, Oxford way down at 3.2%, Grafton firmly in the middle, once again, as a percentage of our budget that we spend on debt. Even the total debt service number as of 2018 was not wildly out of whack at $3.8 million. We're on the middle in revenue sources. I don't think this should come as any great surprise to anybody. Our tax levy, you know, outside of a few outliers like Westboro and Shrewsbury on the high end and Oxford on the real low end at 24, we're right in the middle at $44.8 million. The percentage of our budget that is attributable to state aid is 18.6. Towns like Bellingham, Millbury are higher in the 19 range. Uxbridge, 21%. Oops, I want to go backwards. And I can't read that bottom slide. Who's 29.8%? Oxford. So you don't necessarily want to be Oxford. There's a reason that they're 29.8%. But 18.6%, we can tell you, is down off our historical average of about 5 points higher as of 20 years ago. So that is our revenue. Actually, I do want to go back to that for 1 second. As far as the other, I think the other is sort of important. You know, where can we find other revenue sources? We are, again, sort of in the middle there in terms of the other as a percentage of our budget. That leads us to, that I guess begs the question, what more could we be doing on the income side? The income analysis for us is going to be just as important as the expense side, certainly moving forward. We sort of did the residential versus industrial. So this is an important slide. Barry Smith put all these slides together, so thank you, Barry. But this is a really important one for us. So the red line that you see down the bottom of this graph is state aid over the past 20 years, 2003 all the way up to 2020. It's almost a flat line. If you put a marble on the right side of that line, it would slowly make its way down toward the left part of the graph. Whereas if you put it up on the tax levy up here in the middle of the graph, it would flow right down very quickly. Our reliance on our local residential taxpayers has increased exponentially since 2003. And this, again, begs the question of where we are in terms of prioritizing reform, I think, on Beacon Hill, where we are in terms of prioritizing local aid, and whether or not we can continue to enjoy I think some of the service level increases that we have seen over the past 20 years into the future. As you can imagine, if state aid remains on the same trajectory and tax levy remains on the same trajectory, that local reliance on taxes is only going to increase and burden local taxpayers well into the future. And this, more than anything, as far as I'm concerned, is the genesis of repeated tax overrides. It's not necessarily overspending. It's not necessarily a desire to live outside of our means. And we can certainly talk about our service levels, but this graph more than anything raises questions about local municipalities and their relationship with the state, particularly given Proposition 2.5. Here we're looking at, again, the general government, police and fire. Further investigation is warranted. We've sort of gone through this, whether or not, we're lucky in the service levels that we have been provided, or whether or not this is sustainable. I can tell you one of the questions that this raised for us in terms of general government spending was whether or not the staffing levels within the municipal center are adequate. When we have really a nut for general government that hasn't moved very much over the past decade, and you see an increase in population and an increase in demand for services, it really does beg the question about efficiency and staffing level in the municipal center. And then also, I think questions about whether or not we can really enjoy the efficiency provided by the fire and police departments into the future, and whether or not those line items are going to remain steady in terms of the percentage of the budget that we're allocating to them. Total crime per capita, again, I alluded to this a moment ago. Our total crime per capita is low compared to our sister communities, as you can see. Our violent crime rate's low, property crime rate is low, and our population is greater than just about anybody in our peer communities but Shrewsbury. So we've been fortunate there. This is the fire slide again, as Barry notes, before the changeover in staffing. And that just, I think this slide just breaks out a little bit more. I mean, just look, Auburn is spending $2.8 million on fire. Bellingham, 2.7, Westboro, 4.3. Ashland and Northborough up in the 2, Shrewsbury's at 3.4. We've somehow gotten away with $603,000 as an outlay. I promise you that is not continuing. Similarly, same slide for DPW and general government. Culture and recreation, we alluded to this earlier, as a percentage of the budget, we are on the high end of that. And again, that sort of begs the question, is culture and recreation in this community that much of a priority? Are we clawing back enough revenue for some of the fee-based services that we're providing? And this is a sneaky important slide, capital assets and debt in Grafton. Once again, we're in the middle in terms of the general fund debt service that we outlay for our capital assets. And I think we're actually probably pretty fortunate in that. And I know that we are working on a new 5-year capital plan. So here's one that I know has traditionally gotten a lot of discussion: percentage of budget allocated to schools. Again, these budget numbers are a little bit more recent than the slide we showed you with the FY 2018. But again, we are not an outlier in terms of percentage of budget that we're allocating to schools. Shrewsbury is funny because Shrewsbury obviously has an enormous budget, town budget, and that's why their percentage allocated to schools dips. So their school budget's actually not that much more than ours in terms of real dollars. Their total budget is, thus their percentage dips a little bit right here. But as far as, oops, sorry about that. As far as total percentage of budget allocated, we're pretty firmly right in the middle there. Per pupil spending, this is another figure that's generated some discussion in town over the years. We broke this out into per pupil spending with and without benefits. I'm actually sort of stepping on Angie and Amy's toes here. Do you guys want to chime in on the school portion, the school data, before I get any further into this?
Sure. Just a quick note why we chose the towns that we chose to look at for the school. If you notice, there's a lot less towns on our school slide than there were. There are different towns than there were on the previous slides. Westboro, Shrewsbury, Millbury, and Sutton we chose because, as Ed said, we are competing with them for teachers and resources, and they're the towns that we, commonly get compared to when someone's looking for a house in this area. They're going to be looking at those towns. Ashland and Bellingham, we compared ourselves to them because of the combined effort yield, which is a number that we get from the state. And basically, that's the how the state allocates. It tells us how much money we should be spending towards our schools, and the amount that the state thinks that we should be spending of our total budget is very comparable to Ashland and Bellingham. And that's based on the wealth of the town and the wealth, like the property wealth, and then the income levels of our residents. And then for Holliston, which seems kind of out, in left field here, but Holliston is very similar to us in the way that their town is structured, that most of their money comes from residential taxes as opposed to business. They're in the same percentages as us. And so they have the same tax base. And then they have a very similar dollar budget as well. So we felt like they were a good comparison to use for the school stuff. We didn't include Northborough because they're regional, and breaking out the regional stuff was way too labor intensive. It was, it was just not going to work. So we left them out. But I think you covered everything on this slide, Ed. So for the percentage, what is this? The per pupil spending. So we are 9th in this, for this slide, we were 9th in 2018 in the state for how much money we spend per pupil. And, as we go on, we're going to look at some other data points. The amount of value that we're getting for the amount of money that we're spending, the quality of our school system is something that raises a lot of questions, frankly, like how are we pulling this off? And we just barely started to scratch the surface of exactly what's happening. In this slide in particular, we backed out benefits as part of the per pupil number. And as you can see, for us, backing out benefits doesn't change our graph all that much. And for someone like Millbury, they have a bigger portion of their spending is from benefits. That raises a lot of questions about why is that? Why are we not spending a lot of money on benefits? Is it the quality of the health insurance that we're offering? What are the reasons behind that? The other thing that we tried to back out of this was the transportation costs. And as you can see, Grafton, Holliston, we have around the same amount of transportation costs. And then someone like Shrewsbury, for the population that they have, like their transportation costs are so low. Millbury, Bellingham, same thing. So again, this raises questions about, are these things that we can look at in other towns and see what they're doing and, maybe make changes here, or are there reasons for it that are things that we can't change about the way that Grafton is set up for that kind of thing? But basically, the per pupil spending being so low compared to our sister communities raises a lot of questions for us about why that is. And we'll get into that in the cost structure of the schools.
Next slide, please.
For student demographics, you would receive more aid from the state if you have more English learners and economically disadvantaged students. And as you can see, we're on the low end for those. So we just basically don't get a lot of extra money for the state, from the state for the demographic of student that we have. And part of that, part of the reason why we don't have a lot of English learners in economically disadvantaged is because of the housing situation in Grafton. So this is just, it just kind of gives us an idea of where we're falling with the other communities. Teacher salaries, we are the lowest. And again, this just raises a lot of questions. This is part of the reason why our per pupil spending is low. It raises questions about whether we're competitive enough. Is there room for growth? How are we doing this? When you look at the way that the contracts are structured, we pay less for teachers coming in, for new teachers. And when teachers hit the middle of their career, we're pretty competitive. And then at the end of their career, we're also paying less, kind of goes back down. So when you structure things that way, there are consequences for those things. So this is, what is it going to look like in the next 10 to 15 years? What are the ages of our teachers now? It just raises a lot of questions. Are we going to have a lot of teachers retiring in the future in the next 10 years or so? How is the teacher shortage that is happening now going to affect this as well? Because if our sister communities are paying a lot more money for teachers, then this is who we're competing with. And so again, it just raises a lot of questions about where we're fitting in with everybody else.
I think one of the other interesting things about this, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier, was if we were to do this benchmarking 4 years ago after the last contract was agreed to, the idea behind that contract was to slot Grafton somewhere in the middle of these communities. But as time goes on and other communities have further negotiations with their bargaining units, their staff is getting paid more. And so it's always like, it's always this mark that you're chasing, and it's never stagnant, and the situation's always changing. And I guess one of the key questions to me going forward is whether or not Grafton is going to keep chasing that. And, whether you think they should or not is sort of beside the point. But I think that's one of the questions going forward. And you balance that against what we saw with state aid and a reliance on the local tax base, and you see where the tension comes in, really. And that's not just, I don't mean just to pick out teachers as a bargaining unit, that's true throughout municipal government.
For special ed services, we have 19% of our students in special ed as of the date of this slide. Our special ed program is very strong, and it allows us to keep a lot of students in district. With special ed, it's far more expensive to send students out of district. And also some of the money that we get from the state is earmarked for special education. So when people start talking about cutting, when you start looking at something like special education, that's not a one-for-one when you start cutting things. And on top of it, we get about $500,000 worth of student choice money for students coming into our district. And all of this is tied to the quality of our school system and what we're able to do for our students. So when you start looking at, what are we spending money on, and it seems like this is a big percentage of the budget, it's not that simple to break it out, as a one-for-one dollar spent.
If I can just chime in real quickly here, the trends on special education as a percentage of population continue to increase. I believe in this current academic year, we're looking at 21% of our student body receiving special education services. And that's not an outlier. We looked at the other communities as well for the current year. And so whether it's a question of more needs are being identified sooner, and therefore we're having more students getting services early, which is always going to be less expensive in the long run. Or if it's really that students are, experiencing more and more needs, Time will bear that out, but that's something that we need to be cognizant of moving forward, is that we have to serve that population as it expands.
And these are just the key metrics for the schools as far as, how many are teacher ratios, our graduation rate, and you can see that we're in there with the competition that with the people who we're usually compared to. I don't think there's anything particular else about this one.
The only thing about this one is our student teacher ratio is I guess I would say appropriately high. I think we do a pretty good job there of staffing, which again, I mean, is curious given our low per pupil spend. You know, a lot of these things are not necessarily obvious, and sometimes maybe a little bit contradictory. We've got a fairly decent student teacher ratio indicating that our staffing levels are competitive, if not better than competitive with our sister communities, and yet somehow our per pupil spend is less. I mean, that just again raises more questions about the whys and wherefores. And there's MCAS.
This is just the MCAS, yep.
Yeah. Again, sort of right there with the competition. This is just sort of a summary of how we compare. So there is a full report that we have voted on and prepared that I want to send out to all of you, and then have Carter maybe find a place if we could find a neat little corner of our webpage on the town to start publishing this stuff. I think that'd be good. All of these reports, until we come up with the final report, are just drafts. So there is data in here. I mean, for instance, if you notice, there's a discrepancy in the tax rate. The tax rate's changed in the last year, right? Some of the data for instance, is the single family annual tax bill is going to need to be updated. All that stuff, now that we have this, basically the framework of this, it should be relatively easy to fill in the blanks. It was a lot of work to collect this stuff, and I want to thank Barry and Angie and Amy and Mark for attending tonight, and also the rest of the committee for really doing all the work and putting this all together. It has been challenging. Most of this data and the framework for this was, I think, being put together a year ago. And it was about a year ago that we actually started in on municipal cost structure, when we sat down with Tim to interview him, and then COVID hit and the whole thing sort of ground to a halt. But at this point, this is where we're at. And certainly we can entertain questions from anyone if anyone has any.
Thank you very much, Ed. Does any of the board members have any questions on the presentation? All right, Mr. Hoffman.
I thought I'd give other people a chance. This is really, it's compelling information. And I just want to really extend my thanks to this commission for the work that you did. It's information that people need to see, but it's also information that I always worry a little bit about, because anytime you just see a graph, it doesn't tell the right story necessarily. Sometimes you see what you want to see in it, just looking at the raw numbers. So I think some additional context, and I know you guys put this into the report that you guys are compiling and finishing up. So I look forward to seeing that. I guess just the one thing that I wanted to kind of hone in on a little bit is this, it feels like what I just saw was we're underspending in education, in fire and public safety, and some of these, like the basic services that the town provides, right? And those things comprise a fairly significant percentage of our budget. If you add all that up in terms of the, those areas that we're underspending in, we have a we're on the higher end in terms of the percentage of budget that we're spending in education, and yet we have on the lower end of the per pupil spend. There was only one area that was noted that was, we were spending a little bit more than other communities as far as culture and rec. But that part of the budget was a very tiny, it's like 1.4%, I think. So even if we decided to spend less as a percentage of our budget on culture and rec, it's not going to make up for the underspend with the per pupil spend, the fire, the, public safety and all of that. It all seems to me that it has to do with the overall size of our budget. That when you compare us to other towns, our budget is just much smaller as a starting point. So we spend on, the basic thing, which is education. But because there's just there's a minimum entrance fee for educating a child, and that's the per pupil spend, it drives up the percentage of spending in education because we have to provide that a quality service in that area. And it's important to the community. It's one of the basic things that drives sort of the economics in a given town. And so we're doing that. Has anybody, this is a goofy question, it's a little bit wonky, but has anybody looked back to well, I guess I have two questions. And sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but the first is, did anybody look back to when Prop 2.5 was enacted? It strikes me that if we're at all comparing ourselves to a Westboro or a Shrewsbury or any of those other towns that maybe were a little bit further along and had different character than Grafton, their budgets probably had a starting place that was very different in terms of the size of that actual budget relative to Grafton. Because at that point, when it was put in, was in 83, I think, Grafton was very much a rural community. So the size of the budget, when you take that and you add 2.5% every year, if we're drastically different than a Westboro and they just started with a much larger starting place, and then you tack on that 2.5% every single year, that could significantly have impacted the actual total budget that we're at today, regardless of the overrides that we've had, because those came in very, very late. Right. So we struggled, we worked through things. We were very frugal. You just get to a certain point though. And that 2.5% it's an arbitrary number. It's not something that takes into account all of the cost drivers in all of the different towns. It's state government, and it's very imprecise in the way that it impacts individual communities. So I just wonder if there was any analysis on that. And I guess the other question is, was there any correlation done to look at the overall size of our budget and some of these other things with relationship, like the actual size of our budget with relationship to that 90-10 slide that you put up? Like, were we to tack on, additional commercial growth, would that substantially, like in a really meaningful way, would that really impact the tax rates in Grafton? And sort of is there any correlation between the size of the budget and the mix of residential commercial?
So let me answer your last question first. That portion is going to come in on the income generation portion of the budget. So that question, Matt, is exactly what question sprung, I think, to everybody's mind in the committee about what's the tipping point there? What level of revenue would you need to generate from the commercial base in order to tip that 90-10 to a place that would make a difference? Now, when you look at the other communities that are our peer communities, really, you're talking about Westboro is at 75-25 or, 70-30. And we're never going to be Westboro. I mean, we're not going to construct Route 9 through the middle of town ever anytime soon. We're talking about sort of nibbling away at the margins in places that we have the room to grow in terms of industry, right? So we've got Centec Park, Route 30, that area. And then we've got, a few commercial spots, mixed use business along the main corridor, routes 140, 122. But how much more can you put in there that you haven't already, in terms of the infrastructure, and in terms of quality of life. So but that's the choice, right? So at the end of the day, we'll come up with an answer to that question and then put that question to the community. What do you want? You can have things more or less as they are now and enjoy the same quality of life, have less traffic, or at least not as much traffic as you would have if you built out some of these areas, or you can have some income. And how much income do you need to generate from industry is going to make a difference to you and is going to make a difference to the budget. I suspect that, again, you're never going to get to a place where it's like 70-30, maybe, 85-15.
1 second, Mr. Austin.
Sure.
Ms. Moore, did you want to make a question or comment? You had
I
your hand
did. So one of the things that I learned throughout this process is that Grafton is not unusual in this, but we do not charge a separate corporate tax rate. We charge businesses the same rate that we charge households. And if you look, there's a slide in there, I'm pretty sure it made it into the final show, that tells you which communities are doing that. And if you look, they're the communities that, like us, don't have a Route 9 to build up. So the challenge is, how do we make Grafton an appealing place for businesses to come and set up shop and charge them a little more to do that? Because if we did that right now, I fear, based on my very limited knowledge, that we would lose businesses, that they would walk away, they would find a better deal in other towns, and they would continue to flourish there, and we would be the losers. So this is a process that's going to take 20, 30 years to make Grafton desirable for these businesses. And then we could start to tick that up a little bit more. But that's a lot of work.
I want to comment on that too. So every year the select board holds a tax classification hearing, right? And we discuss what we want to do with our tax rate. And every year the assessor does a really good job. I think her presentation, Mary did a great presentation that showed what a split tax rate would look like in Grafton. And you're right, it would put us at a disadvantage to the other towns that we would compete with that have more desirable real estate. But yeah, Mr. Prisby, did you have a
Yeah,
follow-up?
just to answer Matt's first question, the analysis that you're talking about, it was a little bit outside the scope of what we were trying to do. We were trying to take a snapshot in time of how we compare, but also I think a little bit beyond what the resources for analysis would be for something like that going all the way back to 1980. But I think it does raise a good point. And that is this. When you look back to 1980 and you look back to the origins of Proposition 2.5, I think there is a split in opinion from people who were around back then and in the know about whether or not Proposition 2.5 was supposed to be a wall in terms of tax increases or whether it's supposed to be a speed bump. Because as you noted, 2.5% is an arbitrary number. Nothing really grows at 2.5% uniformly. Particularly in the municipal arena, where we've seen increases in cost drivers like health insurance and education that eclipse that by a lot. Our budget usually grows at about 5%, even though our income only can expand 2.5%. So I think the question is, from the perspective of the intent of the law, is it a speed bump where you are just saying, okay, we'll take 2.5% every year unless we can justify it, and then we have to go to the taxpayers? Or is it supposed to be no, under no set of circumstances, unless exigent circumstances arise, should you increase your tax levy beyond 2.5%? I think over the years, as the anti-tax culture has grown, that the latter is the general opinion of the public. But I'm not sure anybody but Barbara Anderson would say that that's actually true, that was the intent. I suspect the intent was more along the lines of a speed bump, and the state was going to fill in the municipal needs. And I see the importance of it. Otherwise, the taxpayer would just be a pass-through for things that you and I and everybody else in this room votes on and wants. But it really has become an unfair barometer of whether or not we're being fiscally responsible, I think, in my opinion.
Thanks.
All right, anyone else have any other questions? Mr. Fazio.
Thanks. I want to say thank you to everybody for all the work on this. It's really interesting. And, you know, the phrase, it's like the more you know, the more questions you have. I'm sort of, you know, it's going to take a little bit to digest this, and I'm interested in, you know, seeing the progress on the other parts of this. So I thank you all for your work. I'm going to hone in on one slide, which was, Ed, you described with the 2003 with the marble going down and really state aid and taxes rising to close the gap. Does this pertain, I'm assuming this pertains to every community, or was just specifically for Grafton? I just want a little more clarification on that slide. Yeah, that's the one. So these are Grafton's numbers, correct? You're muted, Ed.
Sorry about that. Amy's laughing. See, Amy always laughs when people do this. I swear, and I wouldn't do that unless Amy was in the meeting. Like, I've never done that.
No, ever.
All right. So no. So this was for us in particular. Again, you know, it was challenging enough to take a snapshot of a bunch of different communities just for 2018, 2017. Were we to do this back to 2003, it would be interesting, although I'm not sure how revealing it would be, because some of these communities have particular needs that tend to generate more income, right? So a community like Oxford, a community that has a higher percentage of non-English speaking students, for instance, these communities are going to get additional statutory aid. But I think we thought, you know, this slide certainly is going to make its way into the income report, but I think benchmarked against itself over the past 2 decades was important to include here so that people can understand, look, just relative to our own community, we were enjoying about $10,000, a little less in state aid back in 2003. And now we're enjoying a little bit more. I'm sorry, did I say $10 million? Now we're enjoying a little bit more. Whereas the levy was closer to $17 million back then, and now it's well up over, now it's over 50. So yeah, that's a long answer to your question is no, it's just us.
Okay, great. And then just a comment too, I thought it was very interesting. You know, when I was at first, so all the notes I'm taking here, you know, thinking about why you chose what you did for benchmarking, and I appreciate, you know, where you're coming from. I really appreciate that you separated the schools from the municipal side too. I was thinking that even before this meeting, and how you came about choosing these sister communities. And as I look at the list, and particularly with economic development, and you know, we've kind of covered this using Westboro as the example. As I go down the list, every single town, with the exception of Grafton and Holliston, has a Route 9, has a 146, has a Route 20, etc. Right? And so, you know, when it was brought up during the school report, the correlations between Grafton and Holliston, and Matt's already, you know, talked about this as far as the budget, right? But I would be very interested doing a little bit more of a deep dive, particularly on the school side. The fact that teacher salaries, for example, we're the lowest, Holliston's the highest, right? And we have a similar community. So like diving into what is their structure, I would be very interested in looking at. So, and for me, particularly on the school side, you know, knowing that based on what our needs are in town and where we're spending our money, which is where we should be spending our money, right? On the schools, DPW, but we have what was it? School rec and DPW. But in order to not affect that and increase spending on the fire, police, and general government, which we're going to have to do as our population grows, as we, you know, fix some of the issues we have in town. How do we do that and also, you know, be competitive, right? So again, I started with, now I have more questions. Now that I have more information, this is exactly why. And I think that this benchmarking is really important to do. Like I said, I really appreciate the effort, because then we can turn to these communities and do a little bit more of a deep dive. And I'm pointing at Holliston on these, thinking, okay, you know, like we talked about, in a similar capacity, we're never going to have a Route 9, we're never going to be Westboro, we're never going to be Northborough. Even Sutton, their growth is based on the fact that they're now growing economic development like crazy along 146 corridor. So let's look at a community that's similar to ours in general, maybe has a higher salary, but there's got to be particular things that they're governing different than us that can help us, you know, make some really important decisions. So.
Ms. Correa, did you have a response or question?
So just off the top, Holliston has 2,200 students. We have 3,200 students. So you're right, like our income and our spending on schools is almost identical, but they have almost 1,000 students less than us. They have 950 students less than us. So their teacher salary is $15,721 and ours is $12,003. So it just, because they have so many less students, they have the same budget spread over 65% of the students that we have. I think a lot of it is just that, but I mean, it's so, as we looked at all of these different communities, it was so interesting to see someone that was so close to us, but like you observed, you know, so far away from us as far as what they're actually spending per student.
Right. So, and thank you for that. And my response to that would be, okay, they have less students of us, but it shouldn't be such an enormous gap that we're on the bottom and they're on the top, right? Like, how do we start making just
So the analysis, I could speak a little bit to that. I've negotiated over the past 10 years, I negotiated majority of the teachers' contracts. And the way that average is split is it takes the number of educators and basically you guys divided it out by the number of salaries and you came up with a figure. What it doesn't take into consideration is where on steps and lanes certain educators are. So their pay structure, Mr. Fazio, and it's great that the way that could be is you could have very heavily on the front end of, we're going to say, kind of like teachers who just came in the district within the past 3 or 4 years, whereas some of these other districts, you could have it on the opposite side where most of them are peaked out or capped out on the steps and lanes. So they're going to be on the higher end. So the only, when you look at that analysis, and this is where, the school department has done a fabulous job of articulating these numbers over the years. Whenever this comes up every 3 years, right, as a discussion, they do provide a really good in-depth analysis on just where are they in comparison by the steps and lanes and what are the averages. And if you take that apart and you start looking at the consistencies, you'll find Grafton is all of a sudden in the middle, not on the lower end. Because again, you're taking the average, you're taking all of the teachers who are in the collective bargaining unit, right? And you're basically just dividing that by a number into the total. So yeah, there's ways of looking at that, and that might be something that I don't know if they can do it in a short amount of time for this group, but that might be something that Ms. Mark could take back to the committee and see if they can provide a better in-depth analysis to explain that number with a bit more context to it. Ms. Mark?
Yeah, I just wanted to interject that I was excited to take a look at Holliston to get a hold of their budget. And I think they were one of the districts that was really hard to get something beyond what they had posted online, which is not the whole budget book. And let me just toot Grafton's horn for a minute. So many of these communities don't have a budget book online or a school budget book online. It was very challenging to get some of this data. And I had just gotten through to somebody at Holliston, and then the pandemic hit. So I was about to take that additional step, like to satisfy my curiosity, but COVID. And, you can't ask staff to do stuff like this right now, or even in March. It's just, they're all hands on deck. So we kind of been in a holding pattern, unfortunately, but that doesn't make us any less curious about it. So I am looking forward to seeing exactly what their cost structure is like how their teacher salaries are set up. What are their benefits packages like? What is their percentage? How many of their teachers are taking health insurance? Because there could be a little nugget, a little secret in there. I'm not sure, but it's worth a try. I need to go.
Thank you for
Amy.
having Ms. Mar. Appreciate it. Say
Good
hi.
night, everybody.
Good
Thank
night.
you, Amy.
Does anyone else have any questions? And we can wrap this up and go to the next part of our agenda. I do have an update on the agenda tonight. Mr. Hoffman.
Yeah, just one last question. I'm just wondering, like, what are the next steps for this commission?
Thank you for asking, because that was going to be my comment. So a couple things. Number one, I think as we can see from this discussion, there is a benefit to doing this. And one of the first conversations I had with Carter when he came aboard and I introduced myself was that he had worked in communities where they actually do this every year. And as you can see from our discussion about Holliston and different communities, it can be really helpful to look outside our own bounds and say, okay, well, what are these guys doing? And I can assure you that we're not the only community wondering this, and that there is an entire state full of people wondering, gosh, you know, do we need another override? What is it that we can do better? What is it that we can do more efficiently? And I would be surprised if in the years to come that, you know, there weren't networks of people that were becoming more developed that communicated with each other from community to community about, you know, how are you guys doing? What are you guys doing? How are you handling the economic downturn? All of that sort of thing. So, so at any rate, I think this is an exercise that's worth repeating. And over the course of the next couple months, we'll be updating this data in this report. But the next step really is to move on to municipal and school cost structure, which means, and we actually started this about a year ago, right around the time the pandemic hit. It means going through the old budgets, which I've gotten a hold of and I've scanned for the committee members, to perform analysis and historical analysis that really doesn't have anything to do with other communities, but really with our own community, about the service levels that we're providing on the school side, the service levels that we're providing on the municipal side. And it involves interviewing people and sitting down with them and talking to them about their routine, their budgeting, their service levels, their customer service, their expectations, their staffing needs, and really getting a broad view of how municipal government is operating on the municipal side and on the school side, and then applying that same approach with the questions, all the questions that we've raised here tonight and through the process, both for spending and for income, and then drafting reports for those. And the final one that we'll do revolves around capital. I apologize. Obviously this process has taken a lot longer than we thought it was going to. It was hard enough at the beginning, I think, with getting all the data that we needed to put into a report. It's been impossible to do during COVID. And as Amy alluded to, it would be unfair at this point to ask questions of staff right now without them being in the building over Zoom about how this is going. The one thing I don't want to do is I don't want to do this wrong, because I think it's an important, I think it's an important process. As we head toward the next need for an override, as our levy capacity slowly but surely dwindles down to zero, this analysis is going to be important for the public. Right now, we've got a new town administrator starting on February 22nd. We've got a pandemic that hopefully will loosen its grip on municipal services, perhaps by the summertime. I think at that point, it would be an appropriate time to sit and say, okay, you know, back on track. Tell me about your day-to-day, tell me about your service levels, tell me about the expectations for your job performance, tell me about your budgeting process, and tell me about what you think your needs for your department are going to be going forward. And then putting our heads together and coming up with the municipal cost structure report and the income report. So I think that that's next. Obviously, that's going to require a change in our charge because we were supposed to have been done with this a year ago. So, but I suppose that's something we can take up at a future meeting.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Frisbee. If there isn't anything else, Ed, if you just send me what you presented tonight so I can get that off to Joanne for minutes, that would be great. I know,
Yep.
Barry, you sent me 2 versions of this, but I just want to make sure I get the one from Ed that he presented tonight so we can put that in the minutes. Thank you very much. If there isn't any other questions, Ms. Correa, Mr. Smith, Mr. Haddad, you've been very quiet today, Mr. Smith. So this is odd that you two have been extremely with no questions, but
Angelina and Ed are a lot smarter than Barry and I.
I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. We appreciate it. And we'll take on those next steps that Mr. Fazio.
Just one quick thing, Mr. Chairman. Can we add this to a future agenda just to talk about the logistics and clarify with Mr. Prisby, especially since he's not running for reelection. I'd like to, solidify that he's going to continue kind of leading this charge and, what that looks like, dropping the timeline requirements and all that, and maybe even breaking it down to a little more detail. So we can have, especially if once he's not a board member, that maybe we, kind of put together a timeline, things like that. I think it would be a good discussion to have at a future meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Yeah, we'll definitely talk about that in a future meeting. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming out tonight. We appreciate it. Stay safe, stay warm. Thank you. All right. I do have an update for the board before we get into online permitting. This is on me. I neglected to talk to Chief Gauthier last week about tonight. He only received an invite to attend the meeting, but didn't get a discussion from me. That's on me. So I want to ask the board if we can table the transition of the fire department till next Tuesday. I'll make sure we put that on as our discussion item. I will assure you that I will give Mr. Gauthier ample amount of time so that way he can interface with Mr. Terenzini or get any additional information he thinks that may be necessary, but I don't think it'd be fair for us. That's completely on me and I apologize. So before that, just wanted you to know that he will not be attending tonight as a result of that. So that's on me. All right, so next up here, we do have with us today Mr. Berger and Mr. McGoldrick, who are going to give us a presentation on online permitting.
Yeah, I didn't think you had enough of slides, so I brought some more with us for tonight.
Would you like to present then?
If you want, you can. You can give me control.
You are a co-host. You have the control.
Okay, I'm kind of new at this game, so bear with me. Okay. I gotta move this over here. All right. So I get a couple snapshots I just want to go through and then we can have questions afterwards. Just a quick look on how we really got here. The town has been utilizing some type of electronic information since the 90s. 3 building inspectors ago was Mr. Dubois, and he started using a database system that he built, which was based on a DBase 4. 2001, when I started with the town, I started working on developing an access program to get rid of his DBase because it was kind of outdated. And in 2009, the town was awarded $70,000 under Mass General Law 43D to continue develop the software that I started in 2001 and write an owner's manual for it, which we did do that, and it was out. We've been using it for years. And that's basically what it looked like back then. And as you can see, we had all the other departments in it for land use. And this was out for any municipality that wanted it. But now we went from a homegrown system to off the shelf, and that's really why we're here tonight. So the new system we have is Viewpoint or OpenGov. And right now we have the building department on it, the fire department, and we have a couple permits with the DPW. When the town decided to move to the commercial-based permitting software, our biggest challenge was to verify that all our records will be converted into the new system. At that time, the building department had over 100,000 records that need to be uploaded into the program and not just a PDF. In order to complete that task, the town needed to write a script for the programmers. That time took 2 years for me to write the script and get that information over into OpenGov or Viewpoint. And what that means is every line that's in a field has to be brought so the programmers on the other side know that this field, when they upload it, goes into that field. And it took 2 years to achieve that. The advantage of using an online permitting system is the ease of interactive cooperation between the departments. For an example, when the building department approves a building permit and we issue that permit, a certificate of good standing from the town treasurer must be approved to make sure there are no outstanding obligations to the town. The permitting program, not us, notifies the treasuring department through email that they have a task that needs attention. It also works very well with our plan reviewers. They gain access through the portal to review documents and comment to the applicant directly through the portal, which keeps communication flowing back and forth between the reviewers and the applicant. The other advantage, we're now accepting online payments with credit cards and e-checks, which has streamlined our workload for producing our turnovers to the Treasury weekly. One of my goals is to get as many of our town departments to participate with this online permitting. For an example, the town clerk, and this is a problem with the pandemic. The town clerk has to issue these DBAs, certificates of doing business. But in order to do that, the applicant has to come in and they have to get a form signed from the building department saying whatever they're trying to do is zoned for it. And then they have to go to the assessor's office for some reason they want that. I really don't know what that reason is. Then the applicant has to take those signed forms and go to the town clerk's office to fill out another form. I think if we can migrate all this into Viewpoint, it's going to make life a lot easier for everybody, for the town employees, and especially for the resident that's trying to achieve that DBA. So these are the permits that we're offering with the online system right now. And of course, I was trying to scroll. I can't. It's just a fast snapshot. With the fire department, I'm happy to say that they are now offering sprinkler permits and big fire alarm permits. I trained them on those two applications. DPW is offering road opening and driveway, and building department, we're offering everything. This is a snapshot of our inspectors' daily routine. The office manager still needs to enter the inspections into the program. The office manager does not need to email the inspectors their inspections. All the inspectors have iPads. So in the morning, they turn their iPad on and they can see on the left-hand side is our wiring inspector and on the right-hand side is our building inspector. They have their stuff, they go do their inspections. Then when they're out in the field, this is what they see. They can begin their inspection. You can see that our wiring inspector, George, he's got to do a renovation to a 1 and 2 family. And he's going to either pass it, fail it, or give it a partial. And there's a spot for a comment. And when he hits that button, that message goes to the applicant. If he fails because something just wasn't code compliant, the inspector types in the overall comment and that notifications get emailed to the applicant. I'm just down to my last 2 screens. This is our workflow on how it worked with the old system. And as you can see, what this is representing is the administrative secretary is kind of in charge of everything. Everything is going through that secretary. She's answering the phone. She's giving the inspectors their inspections. She's now taking phone calls from the inspectors on the results. Then she's inputting everything back into the program, which we utilized back in 2001. This is the way it was. You can see that it's very busy. Now we go to the last slide that I have, and you can see that the administrative secretary, she's really not the center of attention. The center of attention is now the online permitting program. Everything is really going through that portal. And it's making our life a little bit easier. Now, just so we're clear, this is a living program. It always has to be tweaked. It's not perfect, but it's the best that we have right now. And that's my presentation. I can answer any questions. And I think Chris might want to add to that too.
Did you want to go, Mr. McGoldrick, did you want to go through your part and then we all ask questions, or do you want us to ask questions first?
Questions first is fine.
Okay, Mr. Frisbee.
Just a quick question. Fee payment, is the fee payment able to be made online or?
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Absolutely.
Great. Mr. Fazio.
Thanks. Just a couple quick questions. Bob, you said that what you'd like to see is most other departments using this. So I just wanted to dive into that a little bit deeper and ask you, I mean, I know we're in a pandemic, but what would it take? What does the timeline look like? You know, like what would you need to accomplish that?
Well, anybody that wants training, I'm offering training to, and I can train through through this Zoom thing. And I'd like to see conservation jump in on this. I'd like to see Board of Health jump in. I definitely want the town administrator's office on it for all those permits that, or those licenses that office issues. These programs are really made for a lineal department. You apply for you have an application, you apply for something, and you get a certificate. That's really how these programs work. They don't work very well with the planning department, where you have all these hearings and these dates and these bonds and these sureties that you have to track. It can be done. It's just going to be a lot more complicated. But with conservation, it's more like fire and building, that they need a wetland permit, they have a hearing, and it goes through. Fire department, I have a lot of applications that can go online, but right now they're not ready for it. What they have is they have their two major permits, which is sprinkler and fire alarm for commercial. We have those up and running, and people applying for those online. They have a whole slew of other permits that I built, or that we built, but not yet. They need the manpower and they need the training to go to the next step.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies a lot. But I will say, I mean, we've been talking about improving efficiency in this way for a long time. And, you know, from my standpoint, you know, as we have a new town administrator coming on board, if there's anything that we as the board can do to, you know, affect the timeline of this for efficiency, and again, like, you know, making this a priority for staff, let us know, because I think it's great. I appreciate the time you're putting in to do this and the training you're putting in to do this. And, you know, we've talked about these obstacles before, people coming in, looking for other department heads, people aren't there, they have to come back to the municipal center for something else. So again, it's like, this is all customer service based, which I know this board is, you know, very much in favor of improving. So thank you. And my second and last question is, are other communities using the same thing? So this wasn't built in-house, right?
No. Mine was built in-house. And
Okay.
it went out to the Commonwealth, and a couple states picked it up. This is a commercial-based, off-the-shelf program. It was Viewpoint, and then they got bought out by OpenGov. And they're based out of California. And I don't know, 65% of the municipalities that are online right now are using this system.
Great. Thank
So
you.
I just want to expand on that point a little bit in
Fine.
terms of what other communities are doing with this, because that kind of goes into what I wanted to talk about. And I'll be doing a more in-depth review of if There's other communities that are using Viewpoint for things like planning board. Off the top of my head, my first impression is that, as Bob Berger noted, it's really related to building permits and licensing, and those are easier to do. In terms of those other boards and committees, it does get more challenging, just in terms of workflow. I think it is possible, but we may be a little bit inventing the wheel from scratch kind of a thing, which I think is great to do, and I think we're willing to do, because there are efficiencies that this does create, especially in terms of communication, being connected to the public, transparency of where the permits are in the process. Just in terms of a building permit and seeing, has planning reviewed it, has, conservation reviewed all these documents, rather than people, submitting a permit and saying, where is it in the queue? Why is it taking so long? They can see, okay, these people are checking off on it. So it allows that transparency as well, which I think is an added efficiency as well. But
Great. Any other questions? Mr. Often, then Ms. Roy.
Yeah, I think, we're continuing to run our town departments pretty lean. We're squeezing every hour out of every person that we have in that municipal center, pretty much across all our departments. So it is definitely in our interests to look at automation and workflows. That's one of the best things that you can do to continue squeezing and not hiring and avoiding additional salary costs, and also to improve customer services. Chris, I'd be very interested in what good looks like in terms of a cross-department implementation of Viewpoint or OpenGov, whatever the software is called, after the acquisition. I'm curious who's doing the configuring of this software, and it feels to me like maybe in order to accelerate this progress a little bit, with maybe putting together some training videos that are specific to Grafton, to making sure that there are interviews with the department heads who potentially could use this, and make sure that the software is fit for purpose, to like almost discover the art of the possible with what is this tool actually capable of, and getting somebody to come in and do some configuration might make some sense, to just be able to make some progress in those areas relatively quickly. So I'm just wondering, Bob, what your perspective would be on that, on just bringing somebody in who's, familiar with Viewpoint implementations, to basically work with multiple departments to try to kind of kickstart it almost, as opposed to something that it feels very grassroots now, which is commendable and it's good, but it does feel like it's sort of on too few shoulders at this point to try to bring this forward at the pace that we probably would like, I guess.
Well, to answer that, I just want to respond on one of those. This is not saving any time. This program does not save time. It garbage in, garbage out. That's what a database is. If you just put garbage information in a database, you're going to get garbage out. You've got to fill it with all the information that you need. And you can talk to the fire department, because they're struggling over this right now, because it's taking them a little more time to use Viewpoint, because like I just said, if you put garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. So we're asking for a lot more information. With bringing other people in to help put Viewpoint together, OpenGov together, sure, we can do that. Right now, we're giving them, let's say, $40,000 a year. For another $8,000, they'll give us 36 hours to do it whatever we want. But I think that's a waste of money, because I'm a little bit of an expert on Viewpoint right now. I mean, I've spent 3 years in here. I built my database. They even call me an expert. All right. I built the fire departments we brought in some outside help that I worked with them to show them what we needed. They're all built now. We have all the talent we need in town hall. All we need is the commitment from the departments that they're going to give me their time, and I can train them and give them the tools so they can build on their own. And then when they get stuck, I can help them through getting stuck. I don't think we need any outside help to expend any more money to get the system up. I think we just need the departments to commit to it.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Ms. Roy and then Mr. McGoldrick.
Okay, so I have two questions. Early on in your presentation, Mr. Berger, you said that you had trained everyone on the program, but now you're just saying that you still need commitment from departments like the fire department to train them. So I guess I'm curious, where are you in the training process? Who still needs to be trained? And as you said, the fire department is struggling. What are you doing to help support them to get through those struggles?
Yeah, I didn't say I've trained everybody. I've trained DPW and I have trained Steve on how to use the iPad and how to do fundamentals of working with it. I'm kind of waiting for the new inspector to come on. And after he's been there for a while and he's good with his inspections, I'm going to go deep into that training with him. I definitely want to train more, but those are the two departments that I have trained.
Okay.
Those are the two people that I have trained.
Okay, so two people. And then my other question is, have you gotten any feedback from residents or developers who've been using it on the other end instead of our end where we're trying to implement it, the people who are using it, how they feel about it? Are they finding it easier? Are they finding it difficult? Or
They find the communication is easier. So what we have, I found there was one problem with Viewpoint is I'll do a plan review and then I'll reject the plan review and I'll ask for 10 items, right? 10 things I need. And every time they upload something, I would get an email and then I'd have to look at the email, then I'd have to look at the permit, and then I have to figure out what, did they give me all 10 things or are they just piecemealing it? And this was driving me crazy for about a week. So finally I had to come up with something. So the note says, please review plan review, basement plan review under attachments. Once you're done with everything, with the requested information, give Bonnie a call and we'll set up an appointment and we'll go over your application together. And now that we utilize Zoom, we can share screens back and forth. So I do callbacks Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. So the homeowners and the contractors, they love that aspect because now they're not sitting around waiting. They're uploading all their information. They know because I gave them a note, give my office a call. We'll set up a time that we can sit down and look at everything that you just submitted online. So on that aspect, they love it. Now, you do have some people that are having a hard time that don't really work well with computers, but we work with Bonnie. You got to love her. She works so patient with some of these people that it gets done. I hope I answered your question. Okay.
All right, Mr. McGoldrick.
Yeah, and just building on that is actually what I wanted to talk about. So I think the important thing to remember about Viewpoint is that it has a learning curve, and not just for staff to learn the system, but also the public that is interacting with it in terms of using the system, uploading the documents. Part of the efficiency, and I agree with Mr. Berger that it doesn't necessarily reduce time because there is that learning curve. By by training, it's that learning curve takes some time to get over. I think that the video guides that you were talking about, things like frequently asked, is going to assist with getting over that curve. But it does have an initial commitment and preserving that knowledge and that training in terms of putting it into training guides is going to help. I think it's also kind of broadly based in terms of it's not designed, the system isn't designed for each specific department. Each department is going to be unique in how they set up, how it links to their email, how they're going to manage comments and things like that. So there have been times that I've used the system and 90% of the comments that I send back to developers are, please re-upload this document because it's not in the right, they've uploaded some kind of file that I can't open. So that causes a little bit more time commitment, that 1 second email. but you start to get this process where that then is more efficient after you've done it a couple times, and you make a more efficient process as it goes, if that makes sense.
Ms. Roy, did you have another question on top of the training piece? I think you had two. I just want to make sure you got both of them in.
So it was training and then how people are responding to it, which Mr. McGoldrick just dove deeper in on top of Mr. Berg's answer. But now that I can ask another question, I will. I know you wanted to go to online payments. What percent of payments have gone through this program now? Would you say it's like 90% of people are using this, 10% of people? Where are you on that?
I would think we're about 90%, if not more. I mean, I have turnover sheets. I can show you a turnover sheet if I can find it. No, I can't because it's on my desktop. We probably have maybe half a dozen checks, and we have a full page of online. But you remember the town hall's closed, so we're getting some by mail and some by the pink box and some through the payment box for the treasurers. But it's nowhere near. I definitely say 90% is online, which is great.
Any other
Come on, I
questions?
stayed up, guys. I want more questions. I stayed up for this.
Oh, I'm holding mine for last, Mr. Berger. Don't worry.
Good, good, very good.
Does anybody else have any other questions? So, Mr. Berger, I just want to say, I want to, commend the work that all town departments have doing, making transitions and doing these types of changes from one process to another. I think even during the conditions in which every town department has been faced with trying to conduct business is extremely challenging, and to able to accomplish this transition during these times, I think is commendable. I can tell you some large enterprise organizations are, with tons more resources, are struggling to do this right now. I think the effort in which you're have described tonight and where you were just even 6-7 months ago and where we are today, and hearing just that news about the 90% payment rate, I think is fantastic. That to me, that's a great, I was thinking 50-50, but that's a great participation rate into utilizing the features of the system. And hearing that it doesn't save time, I think one of the things that town hall we need to balance is we want to work more efficiently. We want the tools for the staff to be able to work more efficiently, but at the same time, the trade-off is, providing those level of services for our customers, which is the residents. And do you feel that this online system, now that you can extend it beyond your original system, which was written in Microsoft Access back in the day, do you feel that this online system is extending that level of service that we're going to call it, town consumers have been desiring?
Well, yeah, it's good for the residents and, like you said, the consumers. But what it does for me is it takes a building permit and then it marries all the mechanicals to that project. So my system never did that. You could have somebody's doing a basement. I don't know they're doing a basement, but they pull an electrical permit to wire a basement, and there was never a building permit for that. Now we can see that, well, you know what? That should be married to a project of the finished basement. So we're seeing where our faults are right now, because now everything gets married. And I think that's very important. You build a house, I have a project for the house, I have every permit that needs to be done in that project.
Thank you. Mr. McGoldrick?
Yeah, so I don't think it reduces the hours of, that staff has to commit to do the regular normal business that they do day to day. But it does raise the value of the service that's provided. And I think that level of service is of greater value. The terms of, and even what the town can do with the data that it collects through this permitting. We can run kind of reports to see, how many building permits are we issuing, how many, in-law apartments came in this year versus over 5 years. And so it raises the level of service for the same amount of hours of work, I think, if that makes sense.
And the other question is that you talked about, integrating with the clerk's office and getting, those certificates and so on and so forth. What's, and maybe you covered this and I just missed it, but what do you think is reasonable for the town to consider about moving towards those other components that are requirements for these permits to go through? So if the clerk's office had access to this and they can upload the certificates versus handing them off to me, for example, and then I've got to, make sure it gets walked down the hall to you. What's your anticipation on implementing, that level of service?
Who was that question to? Was to me or was that to Carter?
That's either of you two. I mean, Mr. Berger, you've been instrumental in this system and you understand the intricacies of it. Mr. Carter's been here for just a few months.
Right. I missed it. I missed who you asked. I did talk to the clerk, and the clerk, before the pandemic happened or right after the pandemic, she was kind of busy with something and she said we were going to get back to it. So I need somebody to put pressure on. We've got to really get back to it. I think the problem with the clerk's office is that electronic signature. I think anything that needs an electronic signature, but if you can do a mortgage online now through Zoom, there's got to be a way of doing this.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I don't have any more questions. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments?
I don't think Ed asked a question.
Yeah, he did.
Oh, he did
ask a question.
Okay.
Yes.
I just had a quick caveat because this was a hang up in another community, not a hang up, but it was something that was surprising. In terms of paper copies, it'd be wonderful to move to a fully digital, but the paper copy requirements to retain records, those do still remain. So we do still need to generate the paper copies and with the wet signatures. So that's another way that hopefully we can, in the future, it's state action to remove those requirements to keep the paper copies. But if that's done, then it frees up a little space as well in that.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Mr. McGoldrick, Mr. Berger, thank you very much for coming in tonight. I really appreciate it. Thanks for giving an overview of the permitting system, seeing where you went and where it is today. I think to Mr. Fazio's point, even Ms. Roy's question earlier, if there's anything that this board can do to assist in prioritizing, please let us know. We have, Evan coming on board here in a couple of weeks. I don't think I would throw this out on his first week, but I do think it might be looking at, hey, look, the town made this investment. This is something that we need to see through in other areas where you can maybe check off some additional service efficiencies for the consumer, and understanding that there may be some not less work for the staff to do, but still the same process. But thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you. Everybody have a good night.
Have a great night, too. Thank you. All right. I know I gave everyone an update. I know there were some people waiting to, discuss the transition fire department. We will put this on our discussion for next week. I do apologize. That's on me. Please hold me personally responsible for that follow-up, just a miscommunication, and I was charged for that. I do apologize. Going on to COVID vaccine update, we have William Blake, who's here from the TA's office, and Mr. Terenzini to give us an update as to Grafton's plan for vaccination.
First, if I might, Mr. Chairman, a couple of weeks ago, we saw that the Board of Health needed some assistance in this area, both in terms of putting some added resources in there. The administrative assistant has been out on leave, and there's just been a flurry, sometimes even 2 changes in a day coming through from the Alliance or from the state. So we have assigned William to try to provide some centralized support to them. And he and I met with the Board of Health last evening in preparation for tonight. And with that, I would turn it over to him to ask him to make his presentation, which has been vetted by the Board of Health chair. Unfortunately, that she had another commitment, was not able to be with us tonight. But I think if you have an opportunity to watch that relatively short meeting last night, and then William's presentations, you'll get a fairly good flavor for where this is headed.
Okay, excellent. The town administrator's office strives for originality, so we also have slides for you this evening, keeping with the trend. If you wouldn't mind allowing me to share my screen, Mr. Carlson, I would appreciate that.
Well, here we go. Also,
Thank you very much. All right, so just to give a quick overview of the situation in the town of Grafton, we are currently at a yellow designation from the state. As of yesterday, February 8th, there have been 930 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Grafton, with 17 recorded deaths. The Board of Health has reported that the post-holiday surge that the state has seen has begun to plateau a little bit in Grafton. And to date, the Board of Health has not received any complaints about large Super Bowl parties or gatherings, which is a good sign and which will hopefully minimize the risk of another spike for the town. The town continues to move forward with vaccinating first responders and individuals over the age of 75, those that are eligible in phase 1 and phase 2 group A. At the Worcester Alliance vaccination site, there have been 65 Grafton residents vaccinated so far. Unfortunately, we only have the data for that specific vaccination site. We don't know if anybody has been going to Gillette Stadium or any of the other places throughout the Commonwealth. But it is reported that Grafton first responders have begun receiving the second dose of the vaccine, which is a good step. In terms of COVID and the municipal center, with the rate at which the situation is changing and things of that nature, the town administrator's office and the Board of Health decided that developing a standing statute for how the municipal center will change the color rating would be a good move. So what we have come up with is, in the event that Grafton is at a red status, the municipal center will be shut down to the general public, open to employees. If we are at a yellow status, it will be open for people to come in by appointment only and only for half of the day. So that way somebody can be manning the front door and keeping track of who enters and who leaves. And in the event that we reach a green or white status, the municipal center will be open to the general public in a manner similar to pre-COVID. In the event that there is a shift in color change moving up, so yellow to red or green to yellow, the change in the municipal center status will take effect the following Monday. So we receive updates on what Grafton status is every Thursday evening, usually after the close of business. So for instance, if we move from yellow to red on February 4th, the new schedule would take effect on February 8th. If the town shifts down in color, the change will take place 11 days after the fact to ensure that we go through one whole cycle of finding out the town status in case that there was a fluke in the data or the dip was not sustainable. So if we move from yellow to green on February 4th, the new schedule would take place on February 15th. In terms of local vaccination feasibility, the Board of Health ran a successful EDS drill at the Grafton High School on Friday, January 22nd for an outdoor vaccination center. It was reported that this was a great success and everything worked smoothly. So that means Grafton has a working plan for both an indoor and an outdoor vaccination site should the need or feasibility arise. The Board of Health is continuing to discuss and explore options for hosting in-town vaccination clinics, but given the ongoing uncertainty of vaccine availability, there is no plan for an in-town clinic at this time. Additionally, MedStar has been contacted about providing vaccination services for for residents over the age of 75 who live in Grafton senior housing. They unfortunately reported that at the moment they are unable to provide this service due to limited resources, but the town is continuing to explore options for people who live in senior housing. Vaccination sites continue to be opened around the state. The CVS in North Grafton will be one of the first CVS pharmacies in the state to receive vaccine doses, and a large vaccination site is being opened at Worcester State University in the coming days. Both of these sites will be open to anyone across the Commonwealth who is currently eligible. They are not community specific. However, the Worcester Alliance site continues to offer vaccinations to eligible individuals, and that is only open to member communities, which includes Grafton. As more sites open throughout the Commonwealth, the biggest hurdle is going to remain the availability of vaccine doses. There's no way to guarantee when or where they will be available, so that is the biggest, one of the biggest obstacles standing in the way at the moment. Moving forward, the Board of Health has reported multiple times that residents need to remain vigilant. Even if they've been vaccinated, they need to continue to follow the 3 W's, which is wearing a mask, watching their distance, and washing their hands frequently to help control the spread of the virus. The Board of Health is also pursuing a public awareness campaign to help reduce the impact of COVID-19 on the public of Grafton. At the moment, they're talking about a Mask Up Grafton campaign by putting signs up throughout town to help make sure everybody is following the mask orders, as well as other educational materials, which they are currently discussing. And that program and plan is constantly going to be developed. The Board of Health has decided that they will not be doing sign-up sheets, similar to what has been utilized in other towns in order to reduce confusion around the availability of the vaccine. They want to avoid over-promising and under-providing in terms of what the town is capable of. And they definitely want to avoid somebody thinking that they're signing up for a vaccine and then missing the opportunity to get one because they are confused or unclear about what they were signing up for. And that is sort of the quick and accurate update that we have for you this evening.
Oh, thank you, William, very much for that. Appreciate it. Does any of the board members have any questions? Ms. Roy and then Mr. Frisbee.
So you might not have the answer to this, but with CVS in Grafton being one of the first CVS locations, is there going to be a concern with traffic? Do they need any extra support? Has CVS reached out to us asking for anything additional?
Colleen, they have not, to my knowledge, reached out to us, but I think that's a good point and something I will discuss with the Board of Health and the chief tomorrow to see if we should be proactive in reaching out to them and report back to you with this week's weekly report.
All right, okay. Mr. Frisbee?
Yeah, that was all fine. I'm wondering why other communities are getting actual doses of vaccines that they're being able to administer and we're not.
Do you have a specific community in mind?
Yeah, so I had sent you this earlier by email, but I'll show you or at least read from it. Jamie Eldridge, who is a state senator in slightly more east Metro West. He represents Westboro, Acton, those communities. He posted on his Facebook page today, last week I sent an email to every public health and council on aging director in the 14 communities I represent to understand how the vaccine distribution was going. And today I spoke to the handful who responded. A few examples from last week: the town of Acton used their 100 vaccines for seniors working in public housing. The town of Northborough administered their 100 vaccines at the Council on Aging, as did Marlborough at the Marlborough Senior Center. So I read these things and I'm like, well, they got vaccine. What's going on? Like, why are we not? And I mean, I'm in government and I couldn't be more confused about what my state and local government is doing to vaccinate people during a pandemic.
Sure. If you, and you, I'm sure you forwarded that to me already, but if you could do that again, I'll circle back. And I think that what the Board of Health is doing is working with the Alliance, trying to take use of all of the resources that are available to us without going to the business themselves. We have school nurses, but we don't have other nurses.
No.
So I'll circle back and again, get that answer into this week's.
I think Carter, this is a discussion for a later date, but it's not too early to bring this up. We have had now successive public health problems. First with the EEE thing that happened 2 summers ago, and then with this. It is not too early to start for this board to start to wonder whether or not the Health Alliance is meeting our needs. I can't continue to look at other communities who are doing a better job of the very thing that things like the Health Alliance exist for, and wonder, like, are we just another customer to them? Like, I'm relying on CVS now, as opposed to, I know 100 vaccines is not a lot, but it would more than cover the crowd that usually shows up at the senior center. This is a discussion, I think, for the coming weeks.
Sure. Let me just say that we will reach out and get you that answer, but do let me observe that $115,000 that you pay to the Alliance, fully loaded, if you were to try to do something with staff or other providers, I think you would find the 115 would not go horribly far.
Right.
But I think it's always good to revisit these things and to take a look, see at that for the FY, for when the agreement is up next. But let's concentrate first on, if you'll forward that to us, we'll get you an answer in this week's. William will get you an answer in this week's weekly report. I will be wrapping up tomorrow night's presentation.
Thanks. Mr. Hoffman, then Mr. Fazio.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for looking into the emergency medical services, getting to senior housing and whatnot. Clearly, that's a population that we need to prioritize and do everything that we can assist with. I'm wondering, I noted in an email that we got today around selective opening of the gym for the food bank and a couple of other things. I'm wondering if there's a safe way for us to use the senior center and the van to shuttle elder residents to get their vaccines once those become available, just as a service that the town could provide, because I'm sure that transportation is going to be a major issue.
Yes, the suggestion of the van for shuttling has been made, and I think that as the vaccination centers become more widely available and we can accommodate more riders, I'm sure that Barb will do that. But again, we'll circle back on that and get you a more formal answer. The center itself, I think I would go back to that the Board of Health has made a decision that at this point, given the local resources that are available and the fact that they've not been able to receive an assured supply of vaccine on a timeline that they're comfortable with, they've held off, but we'll certainly circle back and get you some more information on that. I know that William's taking notes on all these things so that we can respond to you as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Fazio?
Let me, if I might, Mr. Chair, and I'm sorry, Mr. Fazio. I want to go back to the MedStar. That was a suggestion that came from Mr. Mead, Emergency Management Director, when we had the weekly staff meeting. Certainly it is going to be a challenge. I think I mentioned to somebody the other night, my wife trying to get the 94-year-old mother into the car to go to Gillette Stadium or someplace else is probably not really feasible. So the idea that was that, could MedStar or someone else, tap, if you will, door to door. MedStar is not able to at this time, but I know that will stay atop the radar screen, because there are going to be a great many seniors who getting them into, even if it's the the dial-a ride or the shuttle bus, Mr. Upton. It's still going to be a great challenge logistically to get them transported. So finding a way to get the vaccine to them is probably going to be a much better option, and we'll keep that at the top of the list to try to find alternative service providers. My apologies for interrupting, Mr. Fazio.
Not at all. Thank you, and great points. First of all, William, thank you for the update. Much appreciated. Kind of going off the same theme as my colleagues here. So I want to speak about the PR perspective that you suggest, or that we should take. So I'm assuming this information will be available to the public on our website, etc. This, the details of this presentation. And I just want to talk about the details on how we plan on updating residents on vaccine availability as we have changes and updates daily. And specifically with the demographics being our seniors who, although many of them are social media savvy and website savvy, I want to make sure that we include every sort of resource we have to make sure that they are receiving these updates. So maybe taking advantage of cable, local media, etc. Obviously, senior center staff to be able to update people through their newsletters and everything, and make sure that we're giving and providing our residents, specifically the demographics that are eligible for these vaccines, the information as soon as possible. And I know that CVS is, I think, one of 18 in the Commonwealth, the Grafton location. And so since we don't know the timeline yet, which, kind of goes to Mr. Prisby's point of what's happening, when we get them, it's up to us to make sure that, we're contacting our residents to make sure that they're first in line in their hometown to receive these. People are going to be driving from all over the place to get these vaccines, are going to be limited. So I want to do everything we can to notify seniors that are able to get to CVS, for example, and get in line for the vaccines that become available. So I guess my part of that's a comment, but my question to you specifically is, is this information available to the public? Do you have a sort of a PR plan in place for our senior population to update them almost on a daily basis on, what availability looks like and what the updates are for residents as far as COVID-19?
Let me say that in addition to whatever tools William's about to describe, I do think that whenever there's a major change that we can rely upon, that has a relatively broad community-wide application, we should use our code red as well. That is frankly a much more likely to penetrate many people's homes than relying upon them to come and look at the town website or read a newsletter or do something else. The trick to that is you can't use it every time the state changes a rule, because we would be doing this literally five times a week. Sometimes more, sometimes a little bit less, but you would be doing it many times and wearing your welcome out in those households pretty quickly. So I am going to suggest to William that we add the code red to the roster of tools. And William, could you describe how you're trying to coordinate with Nancy and push these out on a regular basis? And sometimes, Ms. DeFazio, the changes are as simple as one that came through the other day, in which those who are primary caregivers for housebound seniors, my wife's perfect example, 94-year-old mother, have now been deemed eligible. But it's, so we got to get that news out, but it's such a small slice of the pie. We can't wear our welcome out either, and then people stop paying attention to us. So that's a challenge for William, and he's going to tell us how he's going to handle that challenge.
So that is definitely a challenge. Something that I am trying to coordinate with the Board of Health to get done is at least once a week have, sort of this big state of the state press release or something to put up on the website and say, these are the major points that have developed this week. This is what you need to know, as well as using the other tools that we have, such as social media, to get some of the smaller but equally important points out there. And I think that you raise a very good point about the senior population in the town of Grafton. And I do want to start talking to Barbara Conley about this, because I have found that she has a very in tune sense with the senior population and the Council on Aging. She knows the best way to get into contact with them. So in tandem with working with the Board of Health, I would like to work with her to ensure that we are getting to that population as efficiently and quickly as possible.
She has had some success in the last week or so. People can't flood the senior center with calls, but we'll get that information out to you as to what she's been able to accomplish in the next couple of days as well.
Mr. Frisbee.
Muted again.
Somehow you got muted. And I didn't do it. You know how that song goes? Can you hear me now? I can't. Okay, he's like, I have one question I'm going to ask. So, I'm hearing about these communities that are getting allocated doses of the vaccine. It's not like the vaccines are being delivered to the town possession. They're being distributed by like either the Alliance, or it's just is it just like a reserved capacity in which that the doses are being given to the communities, and then you go to whoever has that capacity that's authorized to provide those medications?
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that, and I think that we need to circle back and get you that answer, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Frisbee, go ahead.
Yeah, so you can all hear me now? All right, so as we were having this conversation, someone texted me and indicated that the Council on Aging is actually booking for today and tomorrow 120 vaccines for Grafton residents. So were we aware of that? Because I didn't see that in the presentation.
We were aware of it. It was spoken of at the Board of Health meeting last night. Ms. Barb had asked that not be widespread, because she's been doing it through reach out, because she just doesn't have the staff resources to have everyone contacting her. But let me get the particulars of that to you.
All right. I mean, I appreciate, we don't want the system to be overwhelmed, but at the same time, we're going to be asked as community leaders, when it becomes apparent that there are doses that are being administered to other communities, why we're not doing the same thing. And if I'm telling people I don't know, it's a bad answer.
So we're not administering the vaccines ourselves.
No, I understand, but
we're assisting people in getting those appointments booked.
Okay.
This has been substantially enhanced now with the 211 that you can call. Remember when the vaccines first started to become available for 75, it was all online. So now in New Hampshire, I could do it online, or I'm not over 75, but I have some health issues that, thank God, let me become eligible for the vaccine. First time they were actually a positive in my life. We had the online and we also had the phone. So the phone's been added. So let us get that answer for you in the next a day or two here.
Okay.
Thanks. Any other questions? Mr. Hoffman.
Yeah, just quickly, I like the idea of the state of the state type of, maybe it's a weekly update from the Board of Health, augmented by the Alliance as needed, or whoever else. I think that's a really good idea. I'm not a fan of just doing press releases, though. I think we need to try to hit as many different modes of communication as possible. And that would include Facebook and perhaps videos on Grafton Cable. You know, this should be of all the times that we need to communicate to our residents, this is the time, right? So there needs to be a disciplined and thoughtful communication strategy, not just press releases. I guess that would be my comment. And I would encourage you, William, to really think deeply about what are all of those modes of communications? How can we hit all of the different communities? Some of it, particularly with the elder community, is going to just be one-on-one personal outreach, because many of them, you know, they might have phones, but they don't do email. They're not on Facebook. They don't, you know, they're not on the internet a lot. They might take a phone call though. So, you know, we really need to be thinking about all of those different avenues of communication to try to put together something that is as broad-based as possible, to as many people as possible, with as much information as is possible. This is not a simple thing to do. And I appreciate the difficulty of all of the information and how quickly it's changing, to try to, you know, do it in a succinct, compact way that people are getting the right information at the right time in the right way. I know it's not simple, and I don't want to trivialize it whatsoever. But I would encourage you to really think it through, and try to, you know, think a little bit outside the box too. Really look around at what other communities you're going to, and just go for it. You know, I don't think we can over communicate in this environment. So it really needs to be less restrained and more engaging and you know, forward looking, I guess, with as much information as we have access to.
I would agree. Thank you. Mr. Fazio?
Yeah, just one quick comment. I fully agree with Mr. Often in his comments. And I want to say, even getting back to the Code Red, we're in an emergency. And as far as I'm concerned, a weekly call from Code Red is necessary. If it's not for something like this, we've called and talked about trash being delayed. And so, you know, I think people expecting a weekly call from Code Red every Friday, and they know it's an update of COVID vaccines, won't be ignored. And I think people would very much appreciate it.
All right. Any other questions? All right. I don't have anything else. Thank you. I know William, you know, and Carter and everyone in Grafton Town Hall's kind of, you know, this is an ever evolving thing. One day it's one message, and the next day it's another. And you know, I emphasize that messaging is extremely important. And I know you'll do your best and come up with a plan. And yeah, and let us know if you need anything from us as well, please. Okay. Even if you have an idea and you need to reach out to one of us just to get our thoughts on it, I think that helps. Sometimes we know our community really well. I think we could at least provide some sounding board for you on just what reactions may, could happen. So if you can take advantage of that, I would encourage you to do that as well. I don't have anything else tonight. Again, I want to stress and apologize about fire department discussion tonight. I know this is important to us in the department and the town. I will be putting this on our discussion next week. I assure you, I've already got a meeting set up to talk to Chief Gauthier tomorrow to make sure he's got everything he needs in preparation for next week. But if there isn't anything else at this time, I can entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion made and seconded to adjourn. All those by roll call, please. Mr. Rothman?
Often aye.
Ms. Roy?
Roy, aye.
Fazio?
Fazio, aye.
Mr. Frisbee?
Frisbee, aye.
Peter Carlson, aye. All right, thank you very much, everybody. Stay safe. We'll see you next week. Thank you.